Welcome. You're listening to Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show where we unlock the church's ancient battle cry of divine filiation and embrace the gentle kingship of Christ through the riches of the Christian tradition. Happy Tuesday. Let's begin. Welcome back to another episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We are continuing our last week discussing verse 2. So, Pat, maybe one last time.
The kings of the earth stood up, and the princes met together against the Lord and against his Christ.
Boom, boom. So we're talking, I guess, right before about kind of the idea of the sign of contradiction, which obviously comes from Simeon's prophecy of Jesus when Jesus is presented in the temple, and that like there's going to be like a sort of part and parcel. This is the way I understand this, right? Part and parcel to being Jesus, to being the Christ, is you will be a sign of contradiction, and you will be going kind of like against the grain of the world, and in this case, like the kings of the earth, the princes, right? They are against the Lord and his Christ, and so Lewis, you brought up the sign of contradiction. So, what were you thinking about it?
This notion of the sign of contradiction is like really powerful thing in the 20th century. Edith Stein had a very powerful, you could say meditation on the exaltation of the cross about the fact that as Christians in the world, we're called to choose to be on the side of Christ, which is the sign of to be contradicted in the world. And St. John Paul II also had a famous book, The Sign of Contradiction, where he talked about that this is the distinctive kind of definition of Christ in the church, which is a sign of holiness in the world to be spoken against. That's kind of it's like a juxtaposition to the world, something that always is calling the world to account in a way, which means that the world is going to speak against it. And you can read all the way back, obviously, from as we've talked about in previous episodes, from the beginning of the life of Christ. This is what you see. Constantly, his work is being opposed in the world, and you see this obviously as his prominence grows in his public ministry. You see the kind of boiling more and more of the kind of forces, right, that are not choosing to align themselves with him, kind of boiling more and more and speaking against him in a greater and greater pitch. And so, in a similar way, as St. John Paul II and others kind of talk about on this idea of the sign of contradiction, we as Christians also in our own lives will experience this, where as we grow closer and closer to Christ and we try to answer that call to holiness more and more, we should feel that it's natural that we should see this increase in opposition from those who do not, who are allied against Christ, just like these kings of the earth. Like we should expect actually to be a sign of contradiction in the world, to be something that's spoken against by others. And that's really hard to kind of wrestle with, because as Christians, we want to be friends with everyone. We want to be nice to everyone. So it's uncomfortable for us in a sense to kind of know that opposition will be there. But that also is what we see in the life of Christ. And if Christ experienced it, I think we're all going to experience it, right? If we really try to follow him.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the sign of contradiction in relation to this verse, that there's this, if we're in unity with the princes of the earth, then that means we're against the Lord and against his Christ. If we're in the same purpose as they are, if we're aligned with the princes of the earth, then we're on track to be against Christ, right? And and I like this kind of twofold meaning of the sign of contradiction. One is, the world speaks against Jesus, but also he speaks against the world, right? That they're just, I think contradiction could be interpreted either way. But I like this idea of that our behavior will kind of make us stand apart from or be different from some of the things we encounter in the world, and that's a good thing and a necessary thing. And I think sometimes it's easy. I think that just occurs through our behavior. That okay, look, my choice to raise a family or to, say my prayer before meals and when I'm eating lunch with my colleagues or things like that are okay. Those are little acts I can do to be a sign of contradiction. But literally, contradiction means to speak against, right? And so, the idea that this is not just behavior, but we have to talk to them. We have to challenge them with our speech. It reminds me of this point from Furrow by Saint Josemaria, where he's talking about when you encounter people that you don't get along with super easily, And he says, you may love and serve them with your prayer and mortification, but how do you expect them to listen to you if you never speak to them? You will have many surprises the day you decide to talk to them one by one. What is more, if you do not change, they will one day be able to point a finger at you and say quite rightly, hominem non habeo, I have no one to help me. And so this kind of contradiction is not to oppose, not just to be in opposition and conflict, but to challenge, to speak against the actions of others and call them to do something better and higher.
Yeah, I think too about I thought about Saint Athanasius the Great, who obviously he's very famous, and his life was really marked with this fight against the Arian heresy. And there's actually a time when um, basically one of his, I believe it's one of his like fellow priests, kind of came to him. He's like, Athanasius, the whole world is Arian. And then he said, "Well, I guess it's Athanasius against the world, Athanasius contra mundum." And so, like, and obviously, he spoke strongly against. And I love too what you were talking about earlier, because it's not that you hate the world; it's actually you love the world so much that you want to call them the truth. And you know, and that's exactly what you see in Christ's life, right? Christ was a sign of contradiction. He spoke against error. He spoke against things that were wrong. He spoke against things that needed to be called out. He spoke in love, right? And loved, and yet you'll still receive that hate. But it wasn't that he chose to hate in response. It's like that
Right.
passionate love of the world actually is almost what was more of a sign of contradiction. If he had just started at the end as he was being opposed, he was like, you know what, I hate all y'all. And just it was like started going off on them and fighting them. That'd be more people would probably be like, oh, I understand. Yeah, he's probably mad right now. But actually, it was even more of a sign of contradiction, his peace and his love and his continued, and on the cross, him saying, like, Father, forgive them for they, like, that was the part that was even more against the world,
Right.
or kind of continuing to be against the world in a new way, in an even more dynamic way. Obviously, he's already doing this, but in just such a visible way, too, against the spirit of the world.
I love that you brought up that, him on the cross, right? And St. Josemaria, when he's meditating on the stations of the cross, he writes about that in a very similar way. He's like arms outstretched, like to embrace the whole world. Like he doesn't see like the Christ's arms being stretched and nailed to the wood as something that's kind of being forced upon Jesus, but rather something that like Jesus also wills with the Father, right? And therefore it is like an embracing of the whole world. Um, and so yeah, like it's all love, right? Arms outstretched in love. I wanted to quickly throw in a quote from Saint Bede when he was meditating on Psalm 2. And he says this: peoples, crowds, and princes shall rise up against the Father and against me, wanting to dethrone and destroy me, and through me, the Father. I nevertheless will be exalted, as God has made me king. And it has king with a capital K, which is like kind of like we were saying before in a previous episode of like the real king, and just like such an confidence, right, is inspired um by this in a sense, right? If this is, St. B is kind of putting these words on the lips of Jesus, as if he were to be praying with Psalm 2, which I'm sure he was, right? That even with all the kings, all the princes, rising up, like, hey, like it's okay. I can be the sign of contradiction. I can, um, these people can like and seemingly be opposed to me in their ignorance. And like that's okay. It's going to be that way. It's going to be that way until they are until such time that they are enlightened.
Yeah, I like the idea of the cross being the ultimate sign of contradiction. It reminds me of the verse in 1 Corinthians when he says, we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block for the Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. Um, and that's, something you speak against out of ignorance, that it seems like foolishness. And that's the real challenge, is this kind of suffering, this salvific suffering that Jesus offers to the world. That is a huge sign of contradiction. In a way in which he says, look, it's not your comforts, it's suffering that counts.
Mm, mm. And definitely, I mean, it makes me think like, and I wish I was kind of inspired more to pray with this verse in the sense of like, where have I not been a sign of contradiction? Like, where have I kind of just like gone along with the you know, the, the world, so to speak, so as not to, I think St. Maria, he talks about it in the sense of human respects. Like, where have I given into human respects? Um, in it today, right? Um, where have I given in, not been a sign of contradiction, um, because I wanted to fit in some way. Um, and so I guess hopefully in future verses we'll give even more impetus to not give in. All this and more.
Why this tumult among nations, among peoples this useless murmuring? They arise, the kings of the earth. Princes plot against the Lord and his anointed. Come, let us break their fetters. Come, let us cast off their yoke. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord is laughing them to scorn. Then he will speak in his anger. His rage will strike them with terror. It is I who have set up my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will announce the decree of the Lord. The Lord said to me, "You are my son. It is I who have begotten you this day. Ask, and I shall bequeath to you the nations. Put the ends of the earth in your possession. With a rod of iron you will break them, shatter them like a potter's jar. Now, O kings, understand. Take warning, rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with awe and trembling. Pay him your homage, lest he be angry and you perish. For suddenly his anger will blaze. Blessed are they who put their trust in God."
Hey, this is Jake. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We're really glad that you joined us today. We hope you got something out of it. And if you did, I'd love to invite you to share it with a friend, or even just like or subscribe to the platform. It really helps us to get the message out to more people, help more people with the show. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.